This girl's own father kept her imprisoned in a room for 20 years and constantly exploited her. As a result, she eventually had a child. The shocking part is that this is not a fictional story, but is based on a true event. Now the question is, why did the girl's father do this to her every night? How can a father commit such a heinous act against his own daughter? You will be furious if you watch the whole movie. At the beginning of the story, we see a girl named Sarah who lived with her father, mother, and older sister. Sarah was only 17 years old and was about to turn 18 in a few days. During dinner, Sarah wanted to go to a party with her friends, but her father did not give her permission. A major argument broke out between them over this issue. Then, Sarah said to her mother, "Mom, you gave me permission. Why are you saying no now?" At that point, Sarah's mother, out of fear of Sarah's father, said, "Forget it, don't go today." Sarah felt very upset hearing this. She began to feel a lot of hidden anger. Then, Sarah's father got angry with her and sent her to her room. Sarah went to her room. Her older sister Amy was also there. She lived with them because she was working somewhere nearby. Later, we see that Sarah goes to a party with her boyfriend at night. Afterwards, Amy goes to Sarah's room to talk to her, but she is nowhere to be found. When Sarah's father hears about this, he becomes extremely angry and begins waiting for her. Meanwhile, Sarah spends the entire night partying and having fun with her boyfriend. When she returns home the next morning, her father starts scolding her severely. Her mother, Irene, intervenes, and Sarah manages to break away from her father and head to her bedroom. A little later, Amy comes to see Sarah and asks her about the party. Their mother also joins them. Sarah tells them that as soon as she turns 18, she's going to move away to Florida and find a job to live life on her own terms. Sarah's father happens to overhear this conversation. Right then, her father uses a secret key to open a door in the basement, which was hidden behind a bookshelf. He decides to wait for 3 months as Sarah would be completing her graduation by then. The scene then shifts to 3 months later. Sarah is seen talking to her boyfriend. Later, Irene tells Sarah that she's going to the market for some urgent work and asks if Sarah wants to come along. Sarah declines. Once Irene leaves, Sarah's father, Don, calls her over. He shows her a heavy box and says it needs to be moved to the basement. Sarah and Don carry the box down together. It is then that Don opens the secret room. Sarah is completely shocked because she had no idea that a room even existed there. Don and Sarah then enter the room together. At that moment, Dong reveals that all the soldiers used to hide in this room during World War II. While talking, Dong suddenly locks Sarah inside the room and walks out. Sarah screams for her father, but Dong ignores her completely. Sarah begins to panic. She tries desperately to open the basement door, repeatedly attempting to enter the pin, but nothing works. Because she enters the wrong pin more than 3 times, the lights in the room shut off and the ventilator stops working, making it very difficult for her to breathe. Sarah then opens the box that she and Dong had brought there. To her utter surprise, she finds nothing inside except for some of her essential clothes. Suddenly, a light flickers on, and another ventilator starts running. Sarah rushes to the ventilator and screams for help. When Dong realizes her voice is carrying outside, he throws a blanket over the ventilator to make the room completely soundproof, ensuring no sound can escape. That night, Sarah's mother and her elder sister, Amy, worry deeply about her. Her mother wonders where her daughter could be, while Amy calls all of Sarah's friends to ask if they have any news. Everyone claims they know nothing. Meanwhile, we see Dong sitting there quite comfortably, as he is the only one who knows exactly what happened to Sarah. The next day, Sarah tries to open the door with the pin again. However, since she keeps entering the wrong code, the lights go out repeatedly, though they flicker back on after a while and the ventilators restart. Sarah is forced to use a basket as a toilet. 4 days later, when Dong enters the room, Sarah hides in a corner. Seizing the right moment, she shoves Dong and tries to bolt out of the room. However, there's another door outside that also requires a pin to open. Dong then grabs Sarah by her hair and drags her back into the room. And then he says, "I will give you everything. I mean, whatever you need, I will provide. And eventually I will set you free. In exchange, you must obey everything I say." Sarah refuses to agree to this. Enraged, Dong begins to sexually assault his own daughter. It is here that we see the demonic nature of a father. Later, it is shown that Sarah is repeatedly vomiting. A week later, Renee files a missing person report for Sarah at the police station. At that time, Sarah's father tells the police that Sarah wanted to leave home. She wanted to go somewhere far away, get a job, and build her own life. Rennie counters by saying that Sarah only dreamed of such things but would never actually do them. The officer tells them that they should give Sarah some time. Perhaps they should try calling her. Once her anger cools down, she might return on her own. He suggests they give their daughter space because the matter is entirely emotional. On the other hand, Sarah remains deeply anxious. She misses Chris intensely. Chris is then seen arriving at Sarah's house looking very worried. Dong tells Chris that Sarah has run away with a boy named Steve. Steve was Sarah's childhood friend, and since they had liked each other since they were kids, They went far away to be together. Hearing this, Chris is heartbroken and leaves. The scene then shifts to 3 weeks later. Dong brings a cake for Sarah because it is her birthday and she has turned 18. Dong tells Sarah to blow out the candles, and she complies. Sarah remembers that if she listens to everything Dong says and behaves well with him, he might get happy and release her. Dong gifts Sarah a dress and tells her to wear it. Sarah puts it on. Then Dong tells her to ask for anything she wants. Sarah says, "Set me free." Dong replies that it will take a few more days and asks her to wish for something else. Sarah then asks for a television and a clock because, without a clock, she couldn't tell when it was day or night. Dong gives Sarah the clock, but in return, he assaults her again. In this way, 37 days pass. One day, Sarah suddenly notices that the lid of her food container is very sharp, and she turns it into a weapon. Later that day, Dong arrives and tells her to be intimate with him. She craftily hides the weapon, but Dong is so cunning that he senses something is wrong. Realizing Sarah has hidden something to attack him, he beats her severely, even breaking one of her arms. Fast forward to nearly a year of captivity, and we see that Sarah is pregnant. While Dong is setting up a space for her to cook, Sarah goes into labor. She gives birth to a baby girl. When Dong arrives, he finds the newborn, but Sarah is not happy at all. In this manner, 4 years pass. Meanwhile, back at home, Renee spends her days crying, constantly thinking about her daughter. We then see that Sarah is pregnant again. Dong tells her that he has received a promotion. Afterward, he returns to his actual wife, Renee, and shares the news of his promotion with her as well. Renee suggests, "Since you've been promoted, let's hire a private investigator to find Sarah. They might be able to track her down." This makes Dong furious. He snaps at her, saying there is absolutely no need to look for her. He tells her, "We already have one daughter. Let the one who left live her own life." He scolds Renee harshly and leaves. Later, Dong brings a television for Sarah and the children. Sarah and her daughter, Millie, are overjoyed. For Sarah, who had spent years leading a monotonous, isolated life in that room, this was a huge deal. As time passes, Sarah gives birth to a son. One day, Millie develops a high fever and becomes very ill. Dong brings some medicine, but it is meant for adults. Sarah refuses to give it to her daughter. Dong dismisses the concern, saying, "You're the mother, you know best, you handle it." Sarah is filled with rage toward her father. Later, Sarah tells Millie a story. She describes a king who had a daughter whom he loved very much, but one day, the king clipped the girl's wings. She was essentially telling her own life story to her daughter. Time continues to slip away. One day, Chris returns to Sarah's house and runs into Amy. Chris asks Amy about Sarah and mentions, "But Sarah left with her friend Steve, didn't she?" Amy is shocked and asks, "Who told you that?" Chris replies, "Your father told me that." Amy then admits, "Sometimes I feel like Dad is the one who hid Sarah away, but then I also think that maybe she really did go somewhere far away to build her own life." Meanwhile, inside the basement, Millie insists to her mother, "Mom, take me to the park and the zoo." But since Sarah can't go anywhere, she starts playing games with the children inside the room. Soon after, it is revealed that Sarah is pregnant yet again. Back upstairs, Renee gets into a massive fight with Dong because Amy told her everything she discussed with Chris. Amy accuses him, saying, "You always wanted to keep her trapped, and you always kept her under immense pressure." Hearing this, Dong becomes furious. In the heat of the moment, the basement keys accidentally fall out of his pocket. He ignores the keys while trying to handle Renee, but Amy notices them. She takes the keys and heads down to the basement. There, she finds a stockpile of supplies, toilet paper, baby diapers, and many other essentials. Amy is bewildered, wondering why all these things are stored there. Suddenly, Dong appears, scolds her harshly, and kicks her out. Inside the cellar, Sarah goes into labor and gives birth to another son, whom she names Thomas. She begs her father to take the baby and leave him with her mother, Renee. She desperately wants at least this child to grow up in a healthy environment. Dong devises a plan. He leaves the newborn at Renee's doorstep. Hearing the baby's cries, Renee comes out and finds a letter from Sarah that says, "Dear Mom, this is my son. We don't have enough money to raise him, so I'm leaving him with you." Renee is heartbroken and takes Thomas inside. At that moment, Dong finds another hidden note in the bag where Sarah had written, "Dad has kept me locked in the basement." Enraged by this, Dong gives Sarah a brutal punishment. He assaults her once again. Several years pass. Millie and Mike have grown much older. Sarah notices that her father has started looking at her daughter, Millie, with predatory eyes. Realizing his sick intentions, Sarah demands he leave the room. Due to a power outage, the ventilation shuts off, and Millie begins to struggle for breath. She sits by the ventilator crying, realizing she must escape at any cost. Sarah feels her daughter's agony but remains helpless. On the other hand, Thomas is being raised well by his grandmother. Then, one day, it starts to rain, and the rainwater begins to drip onto Sarah. At that moment, Sarah realizes there must be a way out. She notices a patch of damp, unfinished wall in a corner of the ceiling. She feels that if she can dig through it, she might find help. She begins digging fervently until nightfall. Sarah shines a light through the small opening she created, and the beam catches the attention of a passerby. However, trouble arises when the man informs Dong that a light is visible from his basement. Dong rushes down and beats Sarah severely. Millie and Mike are terrified. Due to the extreme physical trauma and stress, Sarah suffers a miscarriage. Millie is devastated, and Sarah is left in inconsolable tears. Dong takes the unborn child away to bury it. The next day, when Dong returns, Sarah asks how Thomas is doing. Dong tells her that Thomas is doing very well and has a tournament the following week. Mike speaks up, saying, "I want to play too. When will you let me go outside?" Dong replies, "You can only go out when your mother starts listening to everything I say." Sarah quickly tells Mike that Dong is lying and that he shouldn't listen to him. After Dong leaves, Mike and Millie begin to scream at their mother, demanding to know what they did wrong to be kept prisoners. Sarah tries to explain, "Everything I do is for your own good, to protect you," but they refuse to understand. Overwhelmed by rage and grief, Sarah begins breaking furniture in the room before collapsing onto the floor. She finds solace in memories of Chris, the only beautiful moments she ever had. Seeing their mother in such pain, Mike and Millie feel guilty. They tidy up the room and apologize. Sarah finally reveals the truth about what Dong has done to her. The children are horrified and heartbroken. Suddenly, Millie suffers an asthma attack, and Sarah holds them close, professing her love. Later, during another encounter where Dong is mistreating Sarah, Mike defends his mother and hits Dong. Dong leaves, but in retaliation, he cuts off the lights to the room. As time passes, Dong loses his job. Most of his earnings had been spent sustaining Sarah and the children. Renee, suspicious, questions him about where all their money has been going. Meanwhile, Sarah manages to break a portion of the wall near the ventilation. Dong then receives a legal eviction notice because he can no longer afford the rent. Feeling backed overhead and unable to control the situation, he decides to kill Sarah and the children. He inserts a pipe into the ventilator to pump car exhaust fumes into the room. However, Thomas unexpectedly appears, forcing Dong to turn off the engine. Sarah has now been imprisoned in the basement for nearly 20 years. One day, Millie has another severe asthma attack because smoke from a backyard barbecue party filters into the room. That night, when Dong visits, Sarah begs him to save their daughter. Initially, he refuses, but after her relentless pleading, he agrees to take Millie to the hospital, though he leaves Mike behind. As Sarah steps outside for the first time in 2 decades, she sees her old home, and memories come rushing back. At the hospital, the doctors manage to save Millie. A nurse asks Sarah to fill out some forms, but Sarah is so overwhelmed with emotion that her tears soak the paper. When Dong steps away to get a new form, Sarah seizes the moment. She rushes to the nurse, clings to her, and cries out, "Please help me." Fortunately, a police officer arrives at that exact moment and apprehends Dong. With Sarah's help, all of Dong's heinous crimes are revealed one by one. Mike is also rescued from the basement. When Renee sees her daughter Sarah and her grandchildren after 24 years, she is absolutely stunned. She cannot believe that her daughter had been subjected to such torture for all these years, and that the perpetrator was none other than her own husband, Sarah's father. Dong is sent to prison, and Sarah is finally completely free. However, moving past the traumatic memories of those years in the basement is not easy. A few days later, the 3 siblings are seen playing together while Sarah sits outside with her mother and sister. Just then, Chris arrives. He never married because he still loves Sarah. Seeing him makes Sarah incredibly happy. Chris takes Sarah out and they spend a long time together in peace. With this, the movie concludes. This was based on a true story from 1984 where a girl named Sarah Elizabeth Fritzl in real life was locked in a basement by her father and wasn't rescued until 2008. When this news broke, the entire world was shocked. Everyone was left with the same haunting question: how could a father, the person a daughter trusts most and considers her protector, do something so horrific? So friends, that was the story of the movie Girl in the Basement, based on true events. Let me know how you liked today's story in the comments. See you in the next video. Until then, bye-bye.